This session is about guided inquiry design and how to use it to enhance student learning. Guided inquiry design is a framework for inquiry learning. I'm Anita. I'm a school librarian at Westboro High School in Westboro, Massachusetts. This is my 8th year at that high school. I've been a school librarian this is my 18th year as a school librarian. I actually started in K through 5 and then went to middle school for 8 years, and now I'm at the high school. So this session is about using guided inquiry design to enhance student learning. Anybody in the audience already use guided inquiry design? Are you familiar with it? Okay, thank you. So for today, I just want to start out with just hearing from some people about what your research looks like typically, or what your projects look like in your schools. And maybe what we want to do is just turn in pair share for a minute. And then we're going to, bring that full group for a couple of minutes. We'll immerse into some examples of guided inquiry. We'll have some reflection time at the end, and then talk about questions and connections and things like that. So go ahead and just turn to a partner and just share with someone what your research currently looks like at your school. So if anyone wants to share anything that came up in your share with your partner, or if anybody'd like to share what they're doing at their school and what your projects currently look like. Anybody like to share anything? Okay. All right, so we'll just move on. Let me just go back one second. So some things to think about with that are you satisfied with the outcomes that you're getting? Are your students engaged and thinking critically? And how do you know that? So guided inquiry, for those of you who have not heard it before, so guided inquiry design is a fluid, flexible model that helps you guide students through the flow of discovery and the process of learning from a variety of sources of information to prepare them for successful learning and living in the information age. So that's a pretty broad definition, and that's purposeful. The creators of guided inquiry don't want it to be that it has to look the same for everyone. We heard in the keynote this morning how they were saying, you couldn't take a curriculum from one school and move it to another and get the same outcome. So that's something that we want to be mindful of as we talk about guided inquiry. So for me, my journey with inquiry started about 15 years ago. I was working in a middle school, and I had a fixed schedule, and I had classes that came in. I saw them 3 times in a 6-day cycle, and in order to keep the students engaged and to make sure that it was relevant to them and that I wasn't having behavior issues, I was thinking a lot about inquiry. Like, how could I infuse this into my program? And pretty much I was not doing a lot of collaboration because my classes were so scheduled. It was really hard to collaborate with classroom teachers in that setting. And then when I heard about guided inquiry, so when I was doing that, I saw the effects of that students were more engaged. They wanted to talk about what they were interested in. They wanted to learn about what they were interested in. And then when I heard about guided inquiry, I was already in Westboro. It was my first year there, and I knew that they were doing institutes at Rutgers University for guided inquiry design. And so I applied with a team from my school. It was me and an English teacher and a science teacher and our assistant principal. And we went to the institute as a team. And that was a really phenomenal experience because I had the content area specialists with me. I had the administrator who could say, this is a great thing. And we went back to the school and really were able to implement some things immediately. I also really liked about guided inquiry that there is the component of social emotional learning in there, that you are asking students to connect to their own learning. You are asking them to make choices that reflect what they're interested in. And you're asking them to reflect on how things are working for them, what they're learning, and they're sharing that with each other. It really does provide a vehicle for students to be experts So depending on how you set that up, and we really saw this with grade 9 science, and I'll talk about specific examples a little bit later. But when you have this team, so it's meant to be a team approach. So it's the librarian, it's the content teacher, or the classroom teacher, and if you have a tech integration person, it's that person as well. And as the team, you are coming up with the learning experiences with with the students at the center. But you're also thinking about how you can bring in authentic mentors and other people besides for your main team. One thing I think, if you've done collaboration, the biggest thing that I think about a lot is the trust that you need to have with those teachers before you can actually have a successful collaboration. So knowing your teachers, knowing what's important to them, your school culture, how is it going to work? What do you need to know about that before you try to implement some things? And then that tension between the teacher control of the content and the students asking their own questions. So that is typically something that takes a little time for teachers to get used to, and I'm all about meeting the teacher where they are. So if the first year that we're working on this, if they say to me, I want to have one question that all the students are answering, that's where we start, and we talk about what it can look like next time. So I like this image for the framework. So this center image here is the actual framework. And you can see it's not cyclical and it's not linear. Some things overlap. But I like how this is overlaid with Common Core because it really does give you that understanding with things that we're always hearing about. So the academic vocabulary, close reading, identifying their own sources, rich focus, all of those things that we're all familiar with hearing about, this fits in perfectly with. There are 5 specific types of learning with guided inquiry. Information literacy is a big component of it. So there's all those typical concepts for locating, evaluating, synthesizing, ethically using. But also learning how to learn is a major component. So it gives opportunity for the student to think about their own learning and how they learn and how best to do that in this situation. And as I mentioned earlier, these guided inquiry design units can look very different. They don't have to be, they certainly are not similar or the same. The curriculum content, gaining new knowledge, interpreting, applying the competence between writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and then that social or social emotional piece that's there as well. There are specific strategies that are embedded into the process. So pair share protocols, conferring with students. So there's a lot of that happens throughout the process. Teacher-student conferences, library teacher-student interviews, teacher-to-teacher reflections and conferences. So these are things that are happening simultaneously with the process. The learning happens through some very specific, intentional purpose of clear expectations, routine, reflection, that both the student and the teacher are doing that, modeling, again, the conferring, and including all phases of the process. So when I mentioned earlier that I will meet a teacher where they are, we do work through all of the phases, they just might not be as deep as the next one would be. This image here shows about the inquiry community and inquiry circles, and I really love this part of the process because it really does take on that community aspect where students are working together, they're helping each other, teachers are talking with teachers but also talking with students. A student can approach 2 or 3 teachers that are there at the same time or go to the teacher that they're most comfortable with, and all teachers are able to help with this. There are also some tools, and I'll talk about those a little bit later, more in depth, but the inquiry journal, the inquiry chart, and inquiry log, all of those things are important, and they can be done differently depending on age level and discipline. So again, here are some of the tools that are embedded strategies for inquiry. Again, the inquiry community is a big part of that. Making sure that you're providing opportunities for students to share what they're doing with each other, but also share with the teacher, share with the librarian, share with other teachers, and inquiry journals. So making sure that you're giving them time in the process, not that it's homework or that you're sending them off to go do that, but that there's time within the day, within the process, for them to think about how they're learning. And I usually frame that around what their struggles are, what their successes are, and what their plan is. So that it's fairly open, but it gives them some sort of framework to go with when they're reflecting. I have another example of reflections in here too, so they can be much more in depth. But when we're preparing for an inquiry circle, it's typically those three things. And inquiry charts are a great thing to use with elementary students. It's a great way for them to work collaboratively and then to hang that all up on the wall and everybody can see it and work from that. And then the tools for continuing and sustaining that process. And these can, like I said, these can look different. There are some things that are sustained throughout the process and then other things that can be added in depending on the teacher's needs, the student needs, and the discipline or age level. So I'm going to start talking about some of my units that we've done, and these are all high school level, so I do apologize to other levels here, but I work with high school students, so these are my examples. There are some books that are out about the guided inquiry design process. There is one for middle school. They're currently working on one for elementary, so keep your eye out for that. This particular class is a senior seminar, so seniors for English choose 2 seminars a year, and psychology and literature is one of them. So in this course, they read books and watch TED Talks and really base all of their skills around psychoanalysis of these literary characters. They do some analytical writing. And then they do a guided inquiry design on mental health. So what we found with this particular unit is that students will typically, especially since they're seniors, they're getting ready to go off to college, they're thinking about the next phase of life and what that transition will be, and they've had some experiences already in their life. So they typically either know someone who has a mental health challenge, or they themselves have struggled with something, or there's someone in their extended family. So typically they're able to really come up with ideas around what they want to research. So it's completely student choice. We do develop their inquiry questions, and that's done like I mentioned earlier, most teachers are, most of the teachers I've been working with are typically a little wary of letting students create their own questions. So this has been a shift for us of allowing students to do this. So I typically take that piece on, and teachers are welcome to work with me through it, but I don't get overwhelmed by that. Like I'm getting, I'm engaged in it, I'm getting excited about what they're interested in, and I think that's a typical librarian area where we're always trying to figure out what the student interest is. So we typically take a day or two, depending on how many kids are in the class, and we work through a process of building their question, and there are many, many ways to do that. I typically do it one way, but there are many resources available for building those questions. So they do a final reflection, so they're reflecting throughout. They are also, depending on the year, they are either creating like screencast-o-matic video reflections. Last year we had Rutgers University was there doing some research around guided inquiry, so they actually interviewed the students, so it was a very authentic experience for them to talk about their research with the researchers. But this is a final reflection from a student. So their inquiry question was, what are the effects of music therapy on people with depression and schizophrenia, and how do they differ between age groups? And this student talks it out when they first started the inquiry project. She felt okay because she was excited to research about a really cool topic like music therapy, but then she got nervous and it became hard. As she was gathering, she got a little frustrated about how her inquiry question was worded. And then, you know, she really had to struggle through some of that. So we not only see what they're doing for their work, we use, when I talk about the tools, I'll talk about Noodle tools as well, but we use different tools for them to keep track of things. But this gives us a way to really dig into what they were struggling with. And most likely, we know this before we get to this point, because we're having all of those conferences and interviews and such with the students. Here's another one. How does OCD affect a person's life, the people close to them, and how can they manage it? And this person talks about how of the 3 topics that they originally chose, music therapy was one. They ended up narrowing it to, or choosing OCD. So what we do before they actually choose their topic is they work through the process. So in the open, we typically have a visitor come in, and we just did this past week. So we had a person with lived experience with heroin addiction come in and talk about what their path has been and their 3 years in recovery. And the students get to ask questions, and that person talks through a framework of their dark days, their coping strategies, their medications, and their hopes, dreams, and successes. So it really does, you know, help the students to understand that we're talking about people, and it's really an interesting experience for them. So we've done that. This year was that person struggling with addiction. Last year, we had people come in from National Alliance of Mental Illness to talk about their lived experience. So students always reflect on that afterwards and really remark how that, you know, you can read about a character and you can read a story, and that's really, really helpful. But when you meet someone and hear from them, and you know, you're in that same room with them to hear about their experiences, it's a different thing. This is a different project with grade 10 history. So they were looking at information around the Civil War. They had already learned some things in class. Again, with the open, there's usually something that captures their curiosity. With this class, the teacher has made museum boxes, so she has lots of artifacts and different things that are from the Civil War. So students can go around in a museum walk and see these different things, and that's how the open is for that class. And then, you know, we do a little bit more of immerse into more information, background knowledge. Then they explore and capture their own background knowledge around this topic. And then from explore, they move into identify. So that's where we're actually creating their questions. So this teacher, the first time that we did this, so this is year 2, in year 1, she said, I really want to try this, but I'm not sure about it. So can we just do like a 3 or 4 day thing? I said, yeah, we can do that. You know, it'll look different than what you're hearing some of the other people are doing because it's only 3 or 4 days. And typically these projects last between 2 to 3 weeks. So that's a lot of time for teachers to think about and to wrap their head around. But what was interesting, so we did the 3-day and we went through all of the different phases. And at the end, she came back to me and we looked at her student reflections together, and she said, every one of her students said, we wanted to spend more time. Like we were just getting into this topic and we had to be done. Like, you know, we wanted more time. So she came to me the next year and said, I want to do the full thing. Let's really go through it. So that was really cool to see. And I think that that's typical, right? When students come back and say, you know, this is what works for me or this is what I need, then a teacher is willing to go further with it. This was the culmination of that research. So for their create and share, they put together an interview, and they were prepared with their project, that a teacher or a peer could come and interview them about their research. So these are some of the pictures from that, but the entire library, and my library's pretty big, the entire library was filled with teachers who signed up to come and hear these different interviews and to talk with kids about what they had done. And what was interesting from that was that I'd worked with science before that, and a couple of the science teachers came down into the interviews, and they were really impressed with the depth of knowledge that these students had. So they went and talked with the history teacher, how did you do this? Like, what things did you add? Which was really interesting to see that emerge. So this is the science one I've been talking about. This unit is actually in the high school guided inquiry design and action. It's not the one I wrote, but it is the unit that we wrote together, science teachers and librarian, me. And this started out this was my very first guided inquiry design project with a teacher. And this started out with a teacher coming to me and saying, I have this project, I'm really not happy with it, I don't like the outcomes, do you have any ideas? I was like, yeah, I have an idea. So she was willing to try it, and we did it with one class initially, then it moved to all of her classes, and this is over a few year span, and then from there it moved to all of the freshman teachers doing it, which brought along its own issues as well, because I am only one librarian. But what was cool to see from that is that the science teachers really were learning about the information literacy and we were adding about the information finding and analyzing and things like that. So this is one that started last year. This is grade 9 English. And this was a teacher who was going to read The Secret Life of Bees with her students. It's a required text, but she wanted to do something different than what the rest of the teachers were doing. It just didn't feel like enough to her, so she wanted to do more. And so the first year, again, she was a little, wary of dipping her whole foot in, so she just wanted to put her toes in. So those students had an essential question. After every one of these units, I meet with teachers and we sit and discuss, here's what do you think went well? What would you like to do different? And same thing, I would say the same things to them, like here's what I saw that I liked. But again, we are also doing that throughout the process. With the psychology and literature course, we actually have a running Google Doc where we just go in and put things in there that we're thinking about. There was one year where she was having them read a book and do the guided inquiry at the same time, and we realized that that was too challenging for them. So going forward, she's like, I'm not going to have them have assigned reading at the same time, like they need to be focusing on this. So that's really helpful for working through different types of things. So for this assignment, like I said, last year, she had them all have an essential question. This year, she was ready to jump in and have each student create their own inquiry question. We actually were able to do several things with this opening, with the open. For last year, we did something similar, but we added to it this year. So we had, again, resources that students moved through stations with. Some of it was newspapers, magazines, there were videos. We wanted them to be thinking about developing context around civil rights, but also bringing it to today around human rights. So how do you have students do that, right? So we're looking at history, how do you bring it to today? So we found some videos that were about current topics, and they were, short videos, and had them watch the videos. We asked them to look at photos that were historical photos, and then they also looked at current newspapers, periodicals, and magazines. And we had a framework for them, just like we were doing with the reflections. There are certain questions that we were asking them to think about, and they did that in groups. So this is that form that they got. So the photos, how does each photo create a feeling? And then some other questions there, and then they had to discuss that in their groups, and then write 2 points that they were taking away from their discussion. So it was interesting to walk around and hear them discuss these things. They're freshmen, they're 14, and they were having, you know, really deep conversations. And same thing for the other stations. So within this project, we used, and I'm just going to use this project to continue talking about the different tools and such. We are a Google Suite school, so we use Google Classroom. Students all have an email, so it's really easy to integrate things in that way. So in Google Classroom, we can make sure to, you know, add things in for them. We can add the LibGuide that I create, so it's a nice, easy way for them to keep track of things. It's also helpful for the reflections and the assessments, and you know, all of these different tools that I'm talking about are all used for assessment. So as we're working through the process, they are being assessed ongoing. So it's not like it used to be, you know, when a student would do a research project, it was compilation based, and they would, you know, you'd hand them a packet and they'd come back next week with their research. This is more about really being involved with the student throughout the process, that you are helping them to learn how to learn. You're helping them figure out, you know, what is the important information, and you're giving them tools to do it. So Noodle Tools, does anybody use Noodle Tools? Okay. I have loved Noodle Tools. I mean, it's a bit challenging to get the students to take to it sometimes, but what we've done now in my district is that grade 7, 8 is now using it. So they come in already, like it's probably falling on that librarian now, but it used to be that, you know, I'd have to sell it to them pretty much. And now they're used to it, they know what it is. And we can go deeper, which is what we need to do at high school. So they're able to, you know, use the note cards as a way to synthesize the information. There are 3 parts to that, where they can take their direct text, they can summarize, and then they can also put in a space for my ideas. And typically what we do with the my ideas with guided inquiry is think about, have them think about their inquiry question, and how does this information that they're writing the notes about, how is it helping them to understand their inquiry question or answer their inquiry question? The challenging part with freshmen with this, and like I mentioned, all of my examples are high school, so they're at a different level than some of the other grades would be. But the challenging thing for them sometimes is to really be able to work through all of that information and to decide what is necessary and what isn't. And then also to be able to make those connections. So that having that My Ideas section really does help. What we also do for every unit is make sure the teacher has inboxes. I'm added to their inbox. The kids share their project immediately so we can see exactly what they're doing. So on day 2, if Joey doesn't have anything in his Noodle Tools, we know we need to check in with them. And it's just another nice check-in opportunity. Trails, tools for real-time information literacy. If you're, I don't know if New Hampshire does DDMs, but in Massachusetts, we had a time period where we had to do district determined measures and be able to show that assessment in a very specific way. That was great for that. I do use it now when I'm trying to figure out something specific, especially in 9th grade, like I might do some assessment for grade 9 and then grade 12, and definitely this year where my seniors are actually, I've seen them since 9th grade. It's my second group going through. So I have, you know, had interaction with them the whole time. LibGuides, you can probably recreate in another way, but I love LibGuides. It's so helpful, and it's a curation and a knowledge sharing space. I've used it for, obviously for the guided inquiry for the projects, but also as a way to have students interact with it. So if they are assessing their own website or finding other information, they could submit that to me, and the teacher and I can assess, you know, whether or not we want that on the LibGuide for them. So again, another way. There are links to all of this in here. I'm just not sure. Let's see where we are with time. Okay, we can go back if we have time. So one thing that I have spent a lot of time with students with inquiry on is about their keywords. So I think we're really good with that at like elementary level. We make those word walls and we give them all of these things to think about, and then they get to a certain age and we're like, oh, they know. And they don't. So thinking about keywords, helping them to use those keywords for advanced searching. Like I spend a lot of time with students on that, and we have lessons around it, but then it's a lot of the interviews and the one-on-one check-ins revolve around that. Every time we talk about their research with them, we're asking them what keywords are they using. And we know, and research shows us, that as kids are going deeper into the knowledge, that their acquired ability to have more domain-specific vocabulary increases. And that's what we want to see. Like, did they stay with the same keyword, or were they able to move on? And we know that they went deeper into the content. I can't stress enough how important reflection is, not only for the student, but for the teacher. So reflecting on, how things are going. We do that through writing, but we also do it within the inquiry circles. So you can have a pair share, you can have a small group, and again, we have graphic organizers that help them prepare for this, so that they're ready with what they need to say when it's their turn and they really are able to share. So a lot of that, especially at high school level, I think, and probably at middle school too, where the kids want to be social and they want to be interactive all the time, this process gives them lots of opportunity for that. They don't have to be researching the same topic. They're still interested in what their neighbor's process has been and what they use to get there. So that's really interesting to see. So this is just one example of a reflection prompt. And again, so this for the grade 9 English assignment, this year, not only did the teacher want to have the students create their own inquiry questions, but we talked about what could be something authentic that they come up with at the end. So they're talking about all those human rights and civil rights issues, like what could they do to educate others or to do something specific in our community. So our last inquiry circle was for them to sit in groups, and sometimes they were groups around the same theme. Maybe they researched something that was similar, but some of the classes it was that they were just sort of grouped together because that's how it worked out. And it was really interesting to hear them talk about it and to realize that they were all learning about their own topic, but again that they were so interested in what their classmates were learning. So this inquiry circle asked them to, what did they find out about it? How was it helpful to others? What is their own personal reflection around it? And then in their groups they talked about, what could we do in our school community? So coming back to what guided inquiry design is, it is a framework for learning. It's a framework to assist students to learn how to learn. It's a framework for teacher as facilitator of learning. So it's not the teacher standing up imparting all this information. It really is the students doing the work. A framework that includes a community of learners. So it's really evident to the students that teachers are learning this too, and that it's a new process for them. And that's really helpful. It's helpful modeling. They don't feel afraid to make a mistake because we're all in this together, and it's that community piece. So it includes inquiry, reflection, creation for student and teacher, and it's a framework for design thinking and PBL. So we, like I mentioned earlier with the grade 9 science, we're using it that way with grade 9 science, that it's actually a way for them to think about what they're doing in their classes. So it doesn't become one project, it's actually embedded into their PBL. So that's pretty cool too. I've put some resources in here. There is a guided inquiry design website which has lots of information on it. There's a 52 GID blog, which is great because it's educators across the country who are blogging about their experiences. So there's a lot on there, all levels, K-12. I think there may be a lot more elementary just because the people who are doing it don't have a guidebook at this point. And I will be teaching a course for a collaborative in Massachusetts, but anyone, non-members can join that too. It's a 6-week kind of getting started with guided inquiry design. So I think we have several minutes left. So I'm going to go back to those other links that were there.
Anita, did you share this as I'm not seeing it for extension?
So I did not, because there was some issue with the presenter platform. So I don't know if they've fixed that, but I will absolutely share it when I have a moment to.
Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't have it for this. I thought it was just me with an issue, but apparently it was a whole system-wide issue, yes. So I just want to show, in case people don't know what a LibGuide looks like. So this is just one example of a LibGuide where we can have different tabs to all kinds of different information here. We have, in Massachusetts, we're lucky to have databases that are supplied through our Board of Library Commissioners. So we use mostly those for our research. And then I'm able to add books from Destiny, add in some websites, and anything that the teacher wants me to add in, I can add in as well. So we usually develop that together. I create the skeleton of it and then send it to the teacher, and then we talk about what other resources they might want. As this was for grade 9, I typically, we have a whole page here that takes them to all of the databases that we have access to, but this is completely overwhelming for grade 9 students. So that's another reason why I really like the LibGuides for the research and for guided inquiry, because I really can, put out the ones that I think are going to be the most helpful to the students. Even though I don't know what their question is going to be yet, I have a general idea of what's going to work well for them. And then in our conferencing, I can, help them decide where to go next. So there's a lot of that. So that's one way to use that. Moodle tools. I don't know if I could have put a example, but well, let's go to questions now. Hopefully people have questions and we can discuss about this, because this is really, like I said, there's a lot of delving into this that you need to do. This is a major overview of things, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to wrap your brain around. Sure.
So my district is K-8, and all our students are tuitioned into 6 different area high schools.
Okay.
6
Wow.
different programs and 6 different expectations.
Yeah.
And we used to use a IIM research model many years ago, and as staff turned over, it sort of became diluted, and we're now in the process of thinking we really need to identify a process that we're all using. But because we're K-8, do you have information about how well this process is? Is there an elementary kind of?
So there isn't a book that's been put together yet. They are working on that right now. But I have the middle school book, and I believe the middle school examples that are in there would be really helpful for you, even K up, because you could look at what they're doing. Also, so in my district, we did just that, where we now, as of this year, we have a certified librarian in every school. So we decided 4 years ago, we wrote a, strategic plan. And we wrote into the strategic plan that we wanted to use guided inquiry design. So it's taken time to get everyone up to speed, and it'll be an ongoing process. But it absolutely works at all levels. So I have 2 librarian colleagues who are in K through 3 who are using it with those students. And happy with it, yes. And that 52 GID blog, excuse me, has a lot of good examples. You can search elementary and all of those examples, or middle school, and all of those examples would come up. And it's people's experiences of what they're doing. So I'm not sure what the date is of the when that book will come out for elementary, but I'm sure that will be very helpful. Also, Leslie Maniotis, who is the editor of all the books, she's amazing. Like, you can tweet at her and say, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? And she'll tweet back to you with suggestions. I would also say, follow the librarians in my district. I can give you those, add them in here. Yeah, or stalk them, find them, they're not hiding. And, see what they're doing, because one of them particularly, every time he's working with a class, he tweets a lot out about what they're doing. So he uses charts with them a lot and, really does a lot of collaboration. We're all on flexible schedules, so he's able to meet with teachers a lot. So if you're on a fixed schedule and you're in certain circumstances that might make it more challenging, I think there are still ways to bring it in. Just like with anything, it's finding that one teacher who's willing to jump in with you. Like I said, that grade 9 science teacher, and she was like, I'm just tired of this, like, what can we do? So it's finding that one teacher, and that one teacher goes around and talks to other teachers, or you send the teachers to that teacher, and that can be really helpful.
And just as an aside, do you think your third grade cohort is using Trails for the third grade version, or is that mostly
So that's mostly what I'm using. I know they do use it from 6 to 8 as well. So it's a 7-8 school, but then there's a 4 through 6. Our district is kind of interesting. It's K through 3, 3 K through 3s, then we have a 4 through 6, a 7-8, and a 9 through 12. So I know from grade 6 and up, they're using it.
I don't know anyone who's using it like below middle school level.
Yeah.
So
Well, what's interesting is I've been talking a lot with Leslie about that and how to either adapt Trails or make something different that would be helpful for guided inquiry specifically, right? Where you would get all those different elements, so the 5 types of learning that you could assess in that way, because that's a paradigm shift as well, to get teachers to think differently about assessment, right? Because we're so used to saying, okay, we're going to grade that PowerPoint at the end, or we're going to grade that presentation, instead of the process. And that can be challenging to get people to see the value of that.
They rush them. When there's a time crunch, it's like rush to get the product at the end.
Right.
That's not the valuable part.
And one thing that we struggle with freshmen with it also is that they're thinking about that end product, right? So to get them to just take a step back, like today we're working on, exploring. So exploring doesn't mean that you're using your inquiry log and jotting down like where you're going so you can get back to them, or using a virtual one. But it doesn't mean that we're taking all these notes and we're doing all this stuff and plopping it into a PowerPoint right away. It's really about where are we right now, and where's that going to lead us. So that's been a shift too, to get people to wrap their brains around that it's about the learning. Which sounds silly to say, because of course teachers think about the learning, but you know what I mean? It's that whole, like, thinking about the process that's happening, the learning that's happening throughout that process. And that students are, when we talk about PBL, or we talk about inquiry, or any of these, things that we're hearing about all the time now, we have to be the facilitator. We can't be the one that's standing there imparting the information. And that's scary to some people. But I think this is a nice way where you have an inquiry team, you have a group of people who are co-teaching, you're doing it together. Yes?
Anita, so can you talk a little bit about maybe the startup process and the PD end of things, like because it's a team approach. So did you facilitate PD with those teachers before making the shift?
Yeah, so when we went to the Institute and we came back, I worked specifically with those 2 teachers initially. And then when we had something to show, we went to other teachers in their departments. And then it's been kind of word of mouth of people talking about, so, this has been like a 4-year, 5-year spread. So, there's a lot of word of mouth that happens, or somebody will happen to come in the library and see something that's happening and be like, what are you doing? And then it's a conversation. Or, I also like to listen actively to what teachers are talking about and try to insert it for them. over the last couple of years, I have been doing more specific PD around it. But teachers weren't ready for that initially. It was overwhelming. You know, it's a lot. Like, I've given you an overview, but it's a complete shift in what we've been doing. So I think that it's important for there to be a team first that really understands the concepts and the philosophies behind it before jumping in and even just buying the book and starting. Like, you know, it's really important to have that training. I know they are going to do another institute this summer. They do them in New Jersey at Rutgers, usually 1 week in the summer. I don't think that information's been released yet. Once I have it, I'll tweet it. So if you follow me, you'll see it. But yeah, I think PD is super important with it. And I think that some of it needs to be concentrated one-to-one or in a department. Like, for example, the grade 9 teachers, there were 4 of them, so we did PD together. We did all of our planning together. Everyone had a voice, which is really important too. Yeah. I hope that answers. You're welcome. Any other questions? I think I must have sped through my... So yeah.
So are you collecting any evidence, like, for, like, before?
Yes, yes. So, yes, and assessment, right? So I also help with assessment. So for assessment, typically I start out by helping with noodle tools. So I grade their works cited. And I look at it with the teachers and show them what I'm looking for, and we come up with a rubric around that. And then assessment also on the reflections, where I'm reading some of the reflections and giving my scores to them, and the teacher does as well. If it's a presentation, I'm typically there for the presentations, and I give my score, and they can, you know, compare and look at, and we can have conversations. So there's a lot of that that's continually happening, and as I mentioned with the reflection piece, that's like a daily interaction, you know, when you're working with the teacher, that we have these conversations. What did you think about that? Oh, you know, this student I think needs this, or this class compared to that class, like, we're in a different place, so how can we get them there? So there's all of that conversation and reflection that's happening throughout. And then, you know, assessment is built in as well. And Google Classroom really helps with that too. I think, you know, if we're talking about, are you with high school? Okay, so if we're talking about younger students, it would look differently. But for Google Classroom at the high school, it's really helpful to have them, you know, every reflection is in Google Classroom. And then we can go back in and respond to them and look at their Google Docs. And in Noodle Tools, I can add comments, and the teacher can as well. The grade 9 teachers, all did Noodle Tools. They learned how to look at it and assess it. So that's the goal too, right? I can't be everywhere all the time. So getting teachers comfortable with it, and then, you know, moving on to more teachers who need more help.
I also mean, like, pre-guided inquiry.
Oh, I see.
Guided inquiry. Like,
sorry, totally missed that.
No, that's good too.
Yeah.
So, like, in terms of, I guess, spreading it to other teachers and, like, what you've seen.
So every year I do an annual report, and I usually do it in an infographic now, but then I keep all of the stats behind the scene and send those to the principal or for my evaluation. But yes, I do keep track of, like, how much growth there's been. For example, last year I collaborated with 29 teachers, 20 of them were guided inquiry. You know, and 4 years ago. Oh, that's my timer. I'm like, what's going on? And, you know, 4 years ago, it was just or 5 years ago, it was just those 2 teachers. So, you know, I think it's like anything, right? When teachers see the outcomes are positive and students are engaged, and they're hearing all this buzz around, you know, what they need to do differently, and they're not really sure how to do that. That's been really positive. So yeah, and I think also thinking about within the district, like I said, this is the first year we have a full staff of librarians through the district, It is amazing. And last year we had, for the 3 elementaries, we had 2 librarians that were going, sharing a school as well as having their own school. So they started a little bit last year, but this year they're really delving more into it. And then at the other levels too, like they're delving in a bit about it. So I think we'll see, like I'm interested to see with the group that I'm going to see tomorrow for psychology and literature, they're seniors, right, to see where we're at, because we also do, before we start the guided inquiry project, we have them do like a homework assignment, like go find information on this or whatever with sort of minimal instructions, just to see what their typical habits are. And then, and not to say like, gotcha, like you're not supposed to do that, but really to have that discussion with them and open up the dialogue around why are you doing that? Like, why aren't you using the databases? Or what is the struggle? And how can we fix that? So then I can tailor it and make it more individualized for students. So I think that's important too, being able to think about those things. Other questions or thoughts? Yes?
That just really struck me, that last, right, what you said, have them do an initial search and then talk to them. I'm picturing doing that with my colleagues, because I pay a lot of money for some of those databases, and I have a newsletter every month that says, here's what I'm paying for, and it's for you. I have ScienceFlix and FreedomFlix, use these, and they still, and we had talked about this briefly, they still are sending them to Google sometimes, because it's easier, and there's no password, and I have a password everywhere, so it's just interesting. I mean, again, it's not a gotcha thing, but it would be interesting to take that time with my colleagues and say, why aren't we using this, and how can I help, and
so it's
that was just interesting.
Yeah, and it's actually how that came about was because the teacher asked me to come in with the assignment they were doing before we started the guided inquiry, and it was the same sort of assignment, and she hadn't really given them any parameters, on purpose. No, now we're doing it intentionally. She was just, that was how she was assigning it. And when I went in and observed, we had a conversation afterwards, and I was like, so what resources did they use? Like, they didn't talk about any of their resources. If we asked them, it was specifically like things like it's that medical one that everyone goes to, and thank you, WebMD. Or like they weren't really using anything that was academic in the least. So it was interesting for her to have that conversation with me. And again, when we talk about collaborating with colleagues, that trust has to be there, right? That they're willing to have that open conversation. So we had already collaborated on other things, so we had a rapport where I could bring that up and say, what if, we structured it this way? So that's worked better for me, to have them see something the students are doing, have the conversation with them. Although I have done PD around that for teachers too. It really is, it's a big problem. It's not, something easily fixed. Yes?
I just wanted to share, for those of us that are not using LibGuides, but we have Destiny, with the 15 update, the collections thing is wonderful. It's a wonderful tool for curating resources, and I have found that my teachers are much more willing to go to that than they are to, search the online catalog for what it is they need. Because you can put your databases in there, and you give it a title, and you make it public to them. They don't need to log in, and
that's great.
They can find everything they need that you have curated for them. So
right. Yeah, that's great.
A nice little addition.
Great point.
Right, second that.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
The problem I'm running into is that I'm finding it really lags.
Oh, yeah.
The Destiny Discovered does not obvious. They won't wait 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you found that anything needed to be deleted from Destiny Discovered to make it probably faster. Because I've got it pulling in results from EBSCO and GPRL, and I've got my resource list connected to it.
Oh, okay. You could probably filter it. Go in your settings, your digital setup, and probably filter it. But tech support is very helpful. So
And
I
then-
would give them a call.
Another thing to think about if you do use Google Classroom is that you can, with Gale databases, you can actually directly send articles and links and such. And we do a lot of that at the high school level where the kids are logging into the databases and then they can, highlight what's interesting and download it and save it, and then it's a Google Doc, and then they can manipulate that information there before we even go to Noodle Tools, so that's really helpful. Yes?
Are you included in the Google Classrooms for most of the teachers in your building? I mean, because my school uses Google Classroom, but I've never included in the classroom.
I started asking
You
them.
started asking.
I just started asking.
That'd be really fun
And
to just be able to be.
yeah, and I started that, we had Moodle before that,
Yeah.
and so I would ask, if you add me to Moodle, I can put these resources in. So, and usually they were like, sure, no problem, that'd be great. And then that has just transferred to Google Classroom. So typically if I have any sort of collaboration with the teacher, I'm in their Google Classroom. Yeah.
Well, there are obviously the schools that have LibGuides and the schools that don't.
Right.
And LibGuides just seems like it's so wonderful. I wish we could afford it, but we can't, so there's always workarounds. But when it has to be added to Google Classrooms, so now I get every assignment from my teachers.
There's a solution.
There's a solution.
Is
Yeah,
there?
set up another email just for that.
You don't even have to do that. You can just filter those, so they filter and skip the inbox. And so they'll, if you know how to use filter and skip the inbox, it will all just go over there, and then you can select all of those.
I honestly don't mind seeing some of their assignments. Just gives me an idea of some of the things they're doing and other ideas.
I have a lot of special ed teachers. I
Yeah.
love having them on my Google Classroom, but they had that problem, and so we set that up. Just
Yeah.
showed them how
But
to
if
do
it
it.
filters it, are they still accessible?
Yeah, because it filters it in on the side, so you've got this little thing you can label whatever you want, which is Google Classrooms, and then you can make subheadings under that by teacher name or whatever. So you just have that filter on the, but you have to click skip the inbox when you're creating that filter so that they go directly into that thing on the side. It won't mess up the rest of your.
Okay.
Sorry.
Great, no, that's fine, that's good info. So I'm wondering if any new thinking has surfaced for you from hearing about this, if this is your first time hearing about it, if it's something you think you might use, or you're interested in learning more information about it, or anything, just wondering how people are feeling about it. Thumbs up if you're like, yeah, this is cool, I want to find out more. Sideways if you're like, I don't know. And down if you're like, oh my gosh, why did I come to this session? Thank you, thank you.
It's not easy to do at the elementary level.
No,
but-
it isn't.
but
It
we
definitely
do-
looks different.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
we do it, and
Oh,
and I
awesome.
feel like I'm getting better and better at it every year.
Would you share something you've done with?
Well, for instance, our fourth grade, they have a guided inquiry project that they need to do every year on New Hampshire animals. Okay, so there's somewhat contained what, that the content is, but yet they get to choose their animal. So
Okay.
in many ways, it's a passion project, but just trying to get them to think on a higher level.
Okay.
I try and come up with real-world questions that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer, but they just lead to more questions.
Right,
And-
exactly.
And so just to keep the process going, that it's not a race to the finish, but
It's that
you want to have a
open-ended.
deeper understanding of what it is you're learning about, and you become the expert on your animal in your classroom. And, the best way to assess it is when you are teaching your classmates what it is you learned about your animals.
Right, yeah,
And
great.
it's worked well, but like I said, for my part, it's improved over the years. I like the idea of getting involved with the assessment piece, which I mentioned to my teachers I would like to do, but they seem to bring their classes in, let me do my thing,
Okay.
and then they go off into the classroom, and I said, well, I'm here. If you have a student who's struggling, you can send them here, I'll come to you, because I have a flexible schedule.
Right. So that shifted for me when I started saying, let's do the project in the library. And so every day the kids come into the library and they know that for the next week or whatever, that's their home. And then I'm there, and the students are more apt to come ask questions and
But it's
then I
actually
can.
just your own email.
somebody who was saying something. Yes.
Is it very common in Massachusetts? I'm wondering, because I don't feel like I've heard a lot of New Hampshire librarians using.
So there's, I think on their website, they list like all the schools and they show a map maybe.
Yeah.
So it's growing, but it's I don't know numbers
Yeah.
of how many, but
And
it's,
you're doing something, you're running some sort of a class or a workshop?
yes, for the Education Collaborative, I put the link in this. So you don't have to be a member. They have a non-member. I don't know if you guys have collaboratives here, but we have like, each part of the state has a collaborative for PD. So it's through them and it's online. Yeah. And that will be, that will culminate more
And it's an introductory.
things about, it's introductory level, it's K-12. It's more about the philosophy and the understanding. There'll be some shared things as well, but so that, and also building your own.
And what time of year is that happening?
So that's starting in January. I think it's January to February. Yeah, when you're on the couch with your blanket. Yeah.
Right. Thinking about taking class.
Yeah, it's 2 hours a week.
Can't commit to 2 days.
It's 2 hours a week for 6 weeks. So it's doable. It's EDCO. The link is in the presentation. Yep, under resources. I added that in. Yes, I will. I tried to earlier. I actually had links in there, and the links weren't working, so I took the links out. So I think it was just they were having issues, and I was messing with it to try to make it better, and it didn't happen. So I will do that later. All right, thank you very much.